Thank you for the warm welcome, Tina. Okay, all right. This is my first speaking engagement ever since I moved back to New York, so thank you for having me. Also, I didn't stand up because I was on my laptop panic preparing. It's part of my process, just let me have it. But this is my first Creative Mornings. I've always wanted to attend because I've heard so many wonderful things. I am just a night owl, and so I'm usually in my second REM cycle by now. So thank you for having me. Tina mentioned on our briefing call that this would be a great safe community to share news stories and get vulnerable, and so of course immediately I went and watched 10 different talks to see what everyone else did, just to see. And I think that's what we normally do when we're nervous about something. We look to other people to see what the norm is and to see what everyone else is doing, because we're human, we're social creatures, and that's just what we do. There is my title slide. So I actually got my start here in New York City. I went to the School of Visual Arts. Do we have any SVA people? Whee! I was an advertising major, and gosh, it was such a long time ago. I lived here from 2009 to 2015. And some of you might know me best from my earlier projects. This was Daily Dishonesty. Was that anyone on Tumblr in 2012? This was a collection of little white lies that I hand-lettered in my college dorm, and it caught a good wave of internet and ended up turning into a book deal for me when I was still in college, partly thanks to Tina. I remember being in my college computer lab, and my friend Jen turned to me and she goes, "Holy shit, Swissmiss just reblogged your project." And it was because of design blogs like Tina's that my work circulated around the internet, and I was able to start getting client work and building the business that I have now. I was just hand lettering on the side for fun, like many people's stories, and this turned into my full-time job. So thank you, Tina. You might also know me for this project. Very lovingly ripped by Urban Outfitters in 2014, I think. This was a project that was inspired. You understand what this was inspired by. It's pretty, pretty cut and dry. I look back at work like this and I'm like, oh, of course, only 22-year-old me could have made this. I look back at it lovingly. You might also know me from my Will Letter for Lunch project, if anyone got into chalkboard lettering in 2013. I wanted to break into chalkboard lettering, so I printed out these flyers and walked around my neighborhood in Crown Heights and went to local businesses. I was terrified to pitch myself. To this day, I still hate pitching, so kudos to anyone who signed up for that 30-second pitch, because I don't think I could get anything done in 30 seconds. I would go up to them and say, "Hi, my name's Lauren. I'm a lettering artist in the neighborhood. Can I do your A-frame sign?" in exchange for whatever I write on the sign. That's all I was asking. I figured I wasn't good at chalk lettering yet, so maybe they would just pay me in food, and that was how I built my chalk lettering portfolio. It was kind of a gimmicky thing that I did when I was 23, and I would only do one per week, though, as to not get fully taken advantage of. It was kind of like my version of giving a free sample as a designer, and it took off online, and people started circulating my name around the restaurant industry, and I'm actually thinking about getting back into that now that I've moved back to New York and gone to culinary school. I think that might be a good way to meet other people in the restaurant industry. You might also know me from Flower Crowns, this fun series I did making flower crowns out of cookies and cakes. I look back fondly on these projects that I did when I was much younger. They're just so silly and effervescent. You also might know me from Peen Cuisine, which is a phallic food blog that I ran for a season. Pretty self-explanatory. But I just wanted to run through just a brief overview of the first half of my career projects to give you a sense of who you're dealing with. Just to wake you up a little in the morning. So when Tina told me the theme for this month's Creative Mornings, I was reflecting on what it meant to blossom, and obviously I just moved back to New York after 9 years of being away, and it just made me reflect on the era of my career that I was here. Those projects that I showed you were the seeds that I planted that allowed the career that I have now to blossom. A lot of those projects turned into client work, which turned into awards, which turned into a portfolio, which turned into more client work, and so on. It led me to speak at events like these and conferences, and it led me to teach workshops and online classes, and it led me to build the business that I have today, and it's the reason that I'm standing in front of you. And it was also the reason why I was able to go independent and quit my full-time job. At the end of 2015, I packed up and left. I went to go travel, and then I met a partner, and we, like many New York couples, I know this is not an uncommon story. A lot of the stories I'm about to share are not uncommon. We met, and we decided we were going to move somewhere other than New York to save money. I'm sure everyone knows people who have done that. And so we packed up as two freelancers and moved to Detroit, and that's where I've been living, or I was living, for the last 9-ish years. And even after all of this, building up of my career and success, and it's what I lovingly refer to as the How to Become Jessica Hish checklist. It was get the client work, it was speak at the design conferences, it was win the awards. There was a very cut and dry path to being a successful designer. I still found myself a couple years ago on my couch at 2 a.m. because night owl, Googling, why does art matter? I was in a weird little depressive funk. I don't know if it was because I had been doing what I had been doing for 7 years at that point. Some of you might be familiar with the 7-year itch that entrepreneurs get, where you're kind of tired of the day in, day out of running a business because you're creative at heart, and so there's this tension between want to create new things but need to run the business. It might have been because we were a year and change into lockdown. Remember that? Not so fun. And I just found myself feeling really disconnected from the work I was doing, and those joyful projects that I showed you a couple minutes ago just felt so far out of reach, even though I had only created them 5 or 6 years prior to that. And a story that I haven't shared before too, that was simultaneously happening in my life, is my partner and I were also going through a bit of a rut in our personal lives too. And I know this is also not uncommon for couples in their late 20s, early 30s to transition from partners to roommates. But after my 2 a.m. search of why does art matter, I also found myself Googling, why does sex matter in a long-term relationship? And I know that this might sound really rich coming from the girl who did peen cuisine, but let me explain. I think I had lost sight of myself after being in a long-term relationship for so long. It was no fault of his or mine. I think that in pursuit of just partnership and cohabitating and having a home together and the day in, day out of sharing a house and taking out the trash, you just kind of lose sight of that. And I was feeling really disconnected in my personal life and my professional life, and I was just kind of adrift. However, these two things happening at the same time were really interesting to me because all of the advice I was trying to voraciously consume to try to solve the problem as fast as possible were kind of the same. A lot of the books about saving your relationship, the relationship advice was basically the same as creative advice. It was basically about spicing things up and keeping the spark alive. And I realized that I had mostly heard about keeping the spark alive in terms of a romantic relationship, but I wish someone had told me that keeping the spark alive in your creative life was part of the job description from the get-go. I think we're all used to that adage of if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And we all know, anyone who's been in it for a couple years or more knows that that's not true. I think you can initially coast off of the excitement of a new thing for a couple years, but it will wear off after sending your 50th invoice, I think. And once I started thinking about it as like, oh, I know that relationships take work, and so, keeping the spark alive in my creative work, I have to approach it the same way. The ease and joyfulness that I was able to approach my work with in my 20s, it just wasn't coming to me as easily later on in my career. And so I set out on a quest to I had these two parallel storylines in my life of okay, time to get the spark back. And I realized that the answers to my big questions were not on Reddit or YouTube or in my Instagram saved folder, even though I was trying to save all the information. But in those late night Google searches, I was desperately looking to other people the same way that when I first got asked to do this, I went to go look at a bunch of other Creative Mornings talks just to see what was going on. I think we look to other people's stories to see if we're going to be okay, to see if we are going to survive the thing that we are scared of, the thing that we're uncertain about. But one of the themes I want to talk about today is increasing our tolerance for uncertainty, especially if you're around my age. I'm 34, about to turn 35, and there was a very high tolerance that I had for uncertainty in my 20s because there was nothing to lose. Everything felt fresh. And the flip side, I think, to finding success and finding stability as you progress in your career is that there genuinely does feel like there is something to lose, but it also holds you back from trying new things and experimenting and keeping that spark alive. So there are these kind of two opposing forces. And so I decided to go back to the drawing board and think, okay, what do I really enjoy? And when I thought about it, I was like, okay, well, for the last decade or so, I've always experimented with food. I love cooking in my personal life. I have worked on a lot of food projects in my professional life. And only you know what you need. No one can answer the question of what should I make? This is a question that you have to answer. You could get an online coach. You could you could go to therapy. Someone else could try to tell you what to make, but only you, at the end of the day, will know what you want to do. So I looked through my body of work, and this is also where the benefit comes in of having a body of work. Maybe you've been working for 5 years, 10 years. You can actually visually pull up your entire portfolio and start to piece together a through line. I think sometimes when you're sitting there thinking in the abstract of what are the things that I like, as a visual person, it was really helpful for me to pull up my work and actually start to connect the dots, whether it was these are the colors that I like, these are the topics that seem to pop up in my work, especially self-initiated work. And I decided, fuck it, I'm gonna go to culinary school. And the way that I came to this decision was, for the longest time, I'm sure you've been asked this question before, but my girlfriends and I would say, if you won the lottery, what would you do with the money? And my answer has always been the same. It was always, I would go to culinary school, Julia Child style, and then host fabulous dinner parties for my friends. And I think at this moment, because I was again, grasping for some ideas of where to get my spark, I realized, hey, I don't have to win the lottery to do that. That's actually not that difficult to do. And so I started to put a plan in motion to make it happen. I announced that I was going to go to culinary school in 2 years from that date. So this was 2021. I decided to go in 2023. And that was enough of a timeline for me to, in my mind, I was like, okay, that's enough time to plan. I can set up my business and I can set up my relationship in a way where we can make this smooth transition and everything's going to be fine. It's like I'm taking no risk at all if I just plan enough. This is very 30-year-old brain of me. And there was something really beautiful that happened, though, when I started to, when I announced it, people were excited. I was excited. I started to feel a little bit of that spark coming back. And within a week of announcing it, I get a call from my dad, who was initially very excited about it. He was like, oh, that's really cool. He always calls me his hippie daughter. It's all because I'm a designer. And he goes, hey, have you considered saving the money and just cooking every day for a year? which is like the most Chinese dad thing to say. And I've always wanted to give like versions of my talks specifically for like an AAPI audience. So if anyone wants that in particular, or it works for any organization, hit me up. And so I laughed because, of course, I hadn't considered it, because I know myself well enough that that was not going to be the way for me to actually do what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to culinary school for me. I didn't even necessarily want to go to be a chef, because I have been sitting from my job for the last 10 years. I wasn't about to start standing. I'm kidding. I would stand for my job. I paint murals. I stand sometimes. It's good to stand once an hour. That's what I've heard. However, I just knew myself well enough. If I was going to cook at home and try to do, there are online culinary schools for much less money. I would dick around for the first 6 months and then go, oh shoot, I have to finish culinary school, and then like panic, like power through the curriculum, and it would not be that helpful. And so the most efficient way is not always the most effective way. I think because we live in a hyper-capitalist society, the currents of our society will always push you towards cutting costs and doing it faster. And when it comes to your personal creative projects, whether it's something like going to culinary school or pursuing a dream, or just pursuing a new hobby, something you want to do, or a passion project where you're trying to hone a new skill, try to avoid the efficiency trap. You owe it to yourself to take your time, make it pleasurable. Like, this is, again, we're doing the antithesis of hustle culture when it comes to our passion projects, because these are so precious to us. I once heard someone describe making art as a willful act of inefficiency, and I thought that that was really beautiful. And I think that I try to approach my passion projects that way now, especially in this like second stage of my career, because the first stage of my career, I feel like I was doing passion projects as they were like marketing tools for my portfolio, which made a lot of sense. But sometimes you need passion projects just for you to get the spark back, and they don't always have to have a specific purpose. They also can be very expensive. And I wanted to share a story too, because at the same time I was reading a book to try to save my relationship called Mating in Captivity. Has anyone read it? I'm trying to see how many people are over 30. I feel like that might be a tell. But Esther Perel shared a really powerful anecdote in there where she talks about how she sees so many couples who come into her office and say that they are just like worn down by the routine of their lives. And because we live in such a like pragmatic, like results-driven society, like we try to solve the problem by coming up with some kind of routine or regimen, and so we oftentimes end up scheduling like we're gonna do sex, or we're gonna do date night, and those are noble attempts. But what she says is we oftentimes exacerbate the problem that we're trying to remedy, and end up like basically doing the meal prep version of romantic stuff, because we're not just trying to get like a decent average. What we're trying to do is reinvigorate the spark. And so it's not about output in terms of your creative project. It's about reconnecting with why you're making things and feeling good about making things. So once I announced going to culinary school, this really beautiful thing happened where I naturally began to crank out more food-based work on my own. I just self-initiated, started to experiment with, this is puff pastry that I used to make this croissant piece. I know that technically with a French accent this doesn't rhyme, but you'll have to bear with me with my American accent. Process shots to show you it's not AI. And it reminds me of this quote from one of my favorite podcasts. He was talking about, he was reflecting on a poem about pilgrimage, and he said, pilgrimage is never about reaching the place that you're going on pilgrimage to. Pilgrimage happens when you begin, the desire to go. So once you actually make a decision and you say, I'm gonna go in this direction, it actually sets other things in motion in a way that you weren't planning on. And so it's really powerful when you make a decision for yourself of, I wanna make this just because I want to. I also started experimenting with stencils. I have very good fine motor skills. And I was like, I wonder if I can cut out a stencil. And I had bought one of those like Cricut machines to try to do this, and it jammed up. And so I ended up doing this by hand, which, so be it. And we ended up sifting flour over this and lifting it up. It ended up working. And I just want to remind everyone, you probably all know this, but I needed this reminder. I need this reminder about once every 90 days. You are the creative director of your own life. I come from an ad agency background. I work with creative directors now as a freelance, like lettering artist and designer. Oftentimes, it's easy to get handed a brief by someone and just execute it, and like, work is work, that's fine, that's our job. But the power of personal work is that you get to be in the driver's seat, and I think that getting in the habit of doing self-initiated work puts you in the driver's seat of your personal life as well, and reminds you that anything that you want to happen, you technically can make happen. Even going to culinary school, you just plan it out in small little chunks. So in 2023, I did go to culinary school. It was lovely. I went to the Institute of Culinary Education here downtown in New York City. I've been a longtime vegetarian, so there were only so many plant-based programs to choose from. Surprise, they're in LA and New York. And so I was here, and immediately when I got here, like, I had set up this plan with my former partner. We were like, okay, we're going to do monthly visits, and like, we had set up our life in a way where we're both super independent, and I was ready to make it work. I left all my stuff in Detroit. I was like, cool, see you in a year. Everything's going to be good. I got here and immediately hit the ground running. I was so invigorated and re-energized by just getting to do food stuff for the first month and being in a professional kitchen and spending my time just peeling and chopping and actually learning proper knife skills. Anytime I posted a video online, like chopping stuff before, I would just get flamed in the comments. So don't look at any cooking videos prior to 2023. Ooh, but I ended up really loving the program. It was only a year long, and so a year was the perfect container for me to feel comfortable taking this risk without like blowing up my life. And I want to say that passion projects are really good containers for taking like calculated risk. If you are in a similar position to where I was, where you felt kind of stuck, maybe there was some inertia where you feel like, I don't know what to do next, setting a container in terms of a project, whether it's something small you want to publish, a zine you want to make, a length of time, a certain project, a program you want to take. It's a really great way to try something out without necessarily like making it your whole personality or changing up your entire life. And that's why I like doing passion projects. Highly recommend. For example, this is one example of one passion project. It took me 8 weeks to do. I just signed up for one ceramics class, made this. It is the culmination of all the things I love. It is a baguette serving dish. It's my prized possession. But for anyone who's done ceramics, you know that going from designer, like on screen, to ceramicist is so painful because every step of the firing process, something can go wrong. You are at the whim of the kiln. So during the firing process, this thing fused together because glaze is just glass. And I had to learn how to chisel it open and then Dremel down, like sand down the edges. And it was a whole process, but it was a good exercise in learning how to let go. And I'm still trying to get this made, so if anyone knows how to manufacture ceramic baguette dishes, please hit me up. I do not want to slip cast these. I don't personally want to. I've had a lot of people suggest that. And indulging your creativity often leads to clarity because it shakes up your routine. I think that the day in, day out routine of just running your life oftentimes can be the thing that makes us a little bit complacent or makes us feel like we're losing that spark, even when things are going well. There's nothing wrong with having a little bit of consistency, but in my own life, I have found that it runs counter to nurturing that spark, and so I found that I have to artificially inject like a little bit of spontaneity and new stuff in there in order to keep myself excited about my work, because keeping myself engaged in my work is part of my job, especially as someone who is self-employed. And I was in culinary school for a year, and within a couple months, I was able to, like the biggest takeaway that I had from culinary school, cooking skills were good, but having something I was so passionate about in my life after a period of lull and feeling creatively uninspired, having something that creatively lit me up, shone a light on something in my life that was not working as well, and it actually was the impetus for me to finally leave my relationship, which is sad, but also was something that I had been putting off for a really long time. Maybe some people have had experience with that. It is what it is, but I share all this to say that if there's something you've been waffling on, if there's maybe a job you've been thinking about leaving, or a client you've been thinking about firing, or a city you've been thinking about like moving to, but you haven't let yourself for whatever reason, I do think that a small step that you can take is just starting to make something that you want to make. It can even just be a small project. It is a vote of confidence in yourself that, hey, I deserve to make something fun. I am capable of making something cool, and I'm going to put it out there in the world. It sounds silly when you hear it and you're like, no, I couldn't possibly do that, but it's really powerful, and if you just do that again and again and again, you will ultimately feel connected to yourself and empowered. And I recently heard someone say this on a podcast, and it blew my mind. These two women were talking about how stability is something that we all seemingly crave, but it actually can be a deterrent to happiness because it is something that gets in the way. Because oftentimes we think about instability as something that, oh, that was for my teens and my 20s, I've outgrown that. But we oftentimes cling on to stability at the cost of like keeping ourselves stuck. Like, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. I couldn't possibly spend the money. I couldn't possibly move to a new place. And I do think that as someone who made some of that trade, you don't have to blow up your life, but trading some stability or comfort for adventure or your curiosity is a trade worth making, especially if you are around my age or older. I would implore you to add a little bit of this because it really was creatively reinvigorating for me. And when you put yourself out there and you start doing work that you want to get, like the kind of work that you want to do, so after going to culinary school, I started getting commissioned for like food-based illustration work. This is a running shoe that I made out of all potato. This is a snowflake that I made out of powdered sugar. These are baguette nails. I put them on just for this talk. One of them popped off in the car over here, so I had to put it back on. But one of the things I've learned, I knew this before going to culinary school, but as a freelance designer, you have to tell people incessantly about the kind of work that you want before they give it to you. I know it's so annoying. You kind of have to be annoying about it, actually. But if you let people know what you're interested in, the topics outside of design, eventually they'll catch on and think of you when they have those projects for you. And a lot of my career has been very DIY, but do it yourself doesn't mean doing it alone, as evidenced by everyone in this room. I started a podcast when I got back from culinary school called Chaotic Creatives with one of my best friends, Rachel. We talk about the ups and downs of being creative, the good, the bad, the panic preparing for talks like this. And actually, a couple episodes that we recorded were the seeds for me being able to share some of this stuff on stage here, because I think the beginning of being able to talk about things publicly is kind of workshopping stuff with friends. And it's always good to have creative community to people who understand what you're going through, people who can lend an ear. And I'm really grateful to have supportive friends, and I'm glad you all have each other here too. So, moral of the story, build it and they will come is the old adage. This is my 2025 update to this. My projects, the reason I have my career, when Tina posted my project, I know that was still heavily considered Web 2. This is pre-personalized algorithms. And, I yearn for that era, but it's no longer with us. And I think that now in this, kind of anything goes internet especially with like AI slop, it is extra important that you make the stuff that you want to make, especially the weird stuff, because you don't know how far it's going to go, how much juice you're going to get out of it. And so at the very least, you need to love it. You need to be able to put it in your portfolio or like share it with your friends so they get a laugh out of it, because it's so humiliating otherwise to make something for the algorithm and have it just flop. So yeah, you just need to make sure that you're nurturing your creative spark, because otherwise it's too demoralizing out there. And it doesn't have to be as big as going to culinary school. It can just be taking a small step, making a project that you want to make. We're all creative and figuring out in real time. I think that's why I was so excited to speak here today, because it's not like a top-down conference thing. It's just creatives talking to other creatives, sharing their stories. And when I used to give this talk, or give talks, I would talk about daily dishonesty as like a life raft that I didn't know I was going to need when I was unhappy at my advertising job. And culinary school ended up being a life raft that I didn't know I was going to need, but in a personal way. And it reads as a more professional kind of passion project, but I currently have no plans to put it into professional use, maybe someday, but I host the occasional dinner party. But I kind of like that at the end of the day, it was just for me. And I want to leave you with your creativity is a compass that can help you stay connected and curious and confident in yourself. And please make more of the work that you want to make after this. I hope it inspires you to do that. Thank you for having me.